Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. For the last 2.5 weeks, I've been on book tour in the United States, and here's something I've recognized. While Jews in Israel are under physical attack, and Jews in the diaspora are under metaphysical attack, it is one and the same war. In Israel, Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah seek to kill Jews, to break us through rockets, tunnels, and massacres. In the diaspora, the goal is a bit more subtle, but just as dangerous: to weaken Jewish identity, to intimidate young Jews into silence, to make them feel unsafe declaring who they are. Both fronts share the same purpose: the erosion of Jewish security and the dismantling of Jewish confidence. As I've spoken in cities across America, I've been struck by how often this theme comes up. Israelis describe the fear of sending their children to school under the threat of missiles. Diaspora Jews describe the fear of wearing a kippah on campus, putting a mezuzah on a dorm room, or wearing a Star of David necklace across a campus yard. The geography is different, but the feeling is identical. Jews are being targeted simply because they are Jewish. And now we have some data that captures this reality in stark numbers. A new survey done globally, released by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, and the World Union of Jewish Students, reveals just how dire the situation has become for Jewish students on campus. The numbers are staggering. 78% of Jewish students worldwide say they hide their Jewish identity. More than 80% say they hide their Zionist identity. And these statistics are not just abstract figures. They're lived experiences of thousands of young people. There's one story that makes this painfully clear. A Jewish student in Vienna described how an Intifada camp glorifying Hamas was set up on campus. There was anti-Semitic graffiti already spread across buildings, but one day at a seminar where she and just about 10 classmates had gathered, they had to flee through the back door because there were rumors that some of the activists from this camp were going to come and look for the so-called Zionists. One student said it felt like the 1930s when Jews were literally chased from European college campuses. And the findings of the survey expose a worldwide crisis. Jewish students in New York, Santiago, Vienna, London, Sydney, Johannesburg, they're concealing who they are not because they're shy or because they're ambivalent, but because they're afraid. They're afraid of harassment, of discrimination, of violence. And it's happening in the very same institutions that are supposed to stand up for openness, for diversity, for tolerance, and for inquiry. On today's episode, I speak with Ambassador Marina Rosenberg, the Senior Vice President of International Affairs for ADL. We talk about the study, the findings, and also what needs to be done. And the challenge for universities is crystal clear. Here's the question. Will they take action, or will they allow intimidation, exclusion, and silence to define the Jewish experience on campus? And since I had Marina on the show, I could not miss but tap into her experience as an Israeli diplomat. Marina was the most recent ambassador in Chile, and she serves in a country that has the largest Palestinian population outside the Middle East. We spoke about the change in relations between Israel and Chile since October 7th, but also the bigger picture of what's happening across Latin America and the challenges that Israel faces there in getting its message out to the masses. We go deep into the numbers, the stories, and the implications, because let's remember, folks, whether it's a rocket in Sderot or graffiti in Vienna, it's all part of the same war. And our response has to be as global and determined as the threat we face. Stay with me. Ambassador Marina Rosenberg, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
So we're talking about a very interesting study that you guys did over at ADL, which looks at, to an extent, together with, has to be said, together with the World Union of Jewish Students, the WUJS, you at the Anti-Defamation League did a study that looks at the global survey, basically, of Jewish university students around the world to look at what their Jewish life has been like, I would say, in the last, maybe that's kind of like a general headline for it, but what has their Jewish life and how has October 7th and the 2 years that have passed almost since then? And we know of the attacks against Jews and just the general feeling of threatening sentiment on campuses all across the world. What has this done to these Jewish students? So share with us, if you can, just the basic general findings, and we can maybe dive into a bit what they mean.
Sure. So ADL, especially in the past couple of years, post-October 7th, has been focused more on what is happening on campuses in the U.S., and we had a few studies and surveys done in the U.S. in the past 2 years. And this time we really wanted to see if the same things are happening around the world. And, I travel quite a bit, and I'm in touch with Jewish communities around the world, and I always make a point of meeting also student leaders of the Jewish unions around the world. And we hear their impressions, but we really wanted to get the data. So this survey that we did together with Woodgist shows that over 3/4 of Jewish students hide their Jewish identity. And more than that, 81% hide their Zionist identity, which is really...
No, let's break that down if you can for a moment.
Sure.
When we say hide their Jewish identity, so if somebody has the name Rosenberg or has the name Katz, that might be a little more difficult to hide their Jewish identity. But what you mean by that, I'm guessing they're not going to wear a Star of David. They're not going to wear a yarmulke. They're not going to... If they have a name that's not Jewish, then they're not going to identify as a Jew. If they're asked, "What's your background?" I mean, how does this come into practice?
So for some students, it means physically not being identified as a Jew, removing the Star of David, removing the kippah, the yarmulke. For others, it's not saying that, "Oh, I just came from Israel," or "I'm going to celebrate Rosh Hashanah." And for others, it's to lie when they're asked, what's your background and are you Christian or whatever. And it shouldn't shock us because we know that not only Jewish students are hiding their identity. In the U.S., in Europe, in North America in general, Canada, and other countries, we've been hearing how Jewish individuals, especially, I would say, in the past half a year, but definitely post-October 7th, are afraid to say that they're Jewish. Also, grown-ups in their workplaces they feel safer just not identifying their Jewish identity, and for sure their Zionist identity, meaning how they feel towards Israel, their support to the state of Israel, etc.
Another interesting finding, so you make a distinction between hiding Jewish identity and hiding Zionist identity, because those are two very different things. So we have like the Rosh Hashanah holiday coming up. People could say, I'm not going to, why am I not at school over these 2 days? So they would say, make up a different story or something else and not reveal that they had gone home for the holiday. But there was also an interesting finding is that women are much more likely to hide their identity, both Jewish and Zionist, than men. Why do you think that is?
Well, we can only assume that women, and I'm generalizing, of course, but young women are more concerned for their safety, and therefore are trying to avoid any type of conflict that might bring them to a situation that they feel unsafe. And this goes to the fact that we also discovered in this survey that 1 out of 3 Jewish students know Jewish peers that have been physically threatened. And 1 in 5 Jewish students know Jewish peers that have been physically attacked. So when you see this around you, it's, of course, I can completely relate to a young female student that feels unsafe to walk around in campus with her Star of David. And, we've been hearing from students around the world similar stories as to what we hear in the U.S., that Jewish students are harassed, are discriminated against, are not invited or not even allowed to join certain clubs or to participate in certain events and so forth. So it's really concerning to see how this affects the daily life of Jewish students in many countries around the world. And just to remind everybody that the survey was done in over 60 countries. So we're really talking about a global phenomenon.
And not to mention the fact that there is just a general feeling also that comes out in the study of how there's sometimes often a denial of religious accommodation, which is also something that I guess comes up now in the holiday season. I can't take this test. I can't submit this paper. I won't be able to attend class, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, whatever the holidays are. And that's something that you find actually much higher, for example, in Europe than in other parts of the world. I'm curious, though, what is the concern here? Okay, fine. So Jews have to hide a bit their Jewish identity. Zionists can't walk around draped in an Israeli flag, right? Israelis are fighting on the front lines in Gaza or over the last 2 years, to some extent also in other places, Lebanon, Syria. And okay, so Jews around the world also have to step up and fight. I mean, like, what do you see is the target here, right? And what is the long-term impact, maybe more, that this will have on Jewish identity and Jewish resilience? Why should we care? Why should we be concerned about this?
So two things. First, we probably wouldn't have this conversation, or this question would come up if we would have been talking about gay students or Black students or Latino students, etc. And for some reason, it's not obvious. It is to you and to me, but it's not obvious to the general public why it's such a huge concern when Jewish students feel the need to hide their identity. And my concern is, one, in the immediate term, Jewish students are afraid because they're seeing peers being attacked for being Jewish. They're not in a paranoia. They're not inventing things. They know peers or themselves that have experienced harassment, discrimination, and even physical attacks. So the first concern is for the safety of Jewish students now, these days, in their campuses. And the second concern when it comes to our Jewish identity, and you hinted to that, is what is it going to do to this generation? And it's not just students in universities. I'm a mother to two young kids, and I walk with them in the streets of the U.S. or when we went in the summer to Europe, and I'm asking them not to speak Hebrew and not to wear their T-shirts that say "I stand with Israel" or anything else. And I'm a Jewish community leader, right?
Right.
I'm like, nobody can claim that I'm not Zionist enough. But I'm afraid for their safety because I hear on a daily basis or on an hourly basis that Jews are being physically attacked in the streets of Paris and New York and Canberra and so forth. So these kids, these young adults and children that are being taught to hide their identity in a way just to keep them safe. I don't know if in the future, when things get better and the situation is better and the number of anti-Semitic incidents go down, will they just flip back and take their yarmulke out and their Star of David? Or are we seeing a generation that will continue hiding their Jewish identity, which is something that, our generation is so far away from that. This is things that I heard from my mom, my grandmother. My mom grew up in Argentina. My grandmother came from Poland. They needed to hide their Jewish identity. And they preferred not to say they're Jewish because they were harassed and discriminated against. I didn't grow up like that. Most of us of our generation, we were lucky enough to live in places where we could be proud Jews and also proud Zionists. And now we're going back to a place where we work so hard to stay away from it. So we really need to think, how can we do both? How we can protect our children, protect the students in university, but make sure that they keep being proud of their identity, their culture, their people, and their religion.
Well, I want to say two things. One is I'll give you a tip that my 13-year-old son told me when we were in Italy over the summer, and I said the same thing. Ellie, let's not talk Hebrew. We all know English because I speak English at home with the kids. And he said, Abba, it's okay. If they ask us what language we're speaking, I'll tell them it's Portuguese. And I said, well, what happens if they actually know Portuguese, right? But I mean, it's just interesting how he's thinking. And you're right. I mean, these kids are being taught to have to think in a way that I don't think other people in the past had to think about. But I also think of something else. And I'm recording this from the United States, where I've been on a book tour with the new book that came out. But I find, obviously, that here you have a lot of the Jews and Jewish communities that are feeling under threat and just so much more security. And we all know this, and you see it, of course, with the work that you do at ADL. But I've come to look at it to an extent that while in Israel, Israelis are fighting a physical battle, in America, and I guess other places throughout the world, in the Jewish diaspora, it's like a metaphysical battle. It's a battle against Jewish identity. It's a similar war. In Israel, they want to eliminate and kill the Israelis and push us out of the land. But everywhere else, it's a battle to make Jews less proud to be Jewish, less proud to be Zionists, and keep the Jew weaker and almost in a corner. I mean, do you see kind of that similar thread that connects these two in the same way?
Yeah, and I'll mention I'm here in Israel now with an ADL delegation, and we've been talking about it with different representatives of the government and civil society here. And our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, always say, that the Israelis are talking about a 7-front war that they have against Hamas and Iran and the Houthis and so forth. And there's an 8th front of communication, information, etc., which is the one that is affecting directly Jewish communities around the world. And at the end, it's all connected. Even if we try very hard to disconnect the things, disconnect what is happening in Israel, or disconnect the situation in Gaza from the safety of Jewish communities. Unfortunately, the adversaries, the pro-Hamas activists around the world, they see us all as one whole. And for them, we are all Jewish, and we are all responsible. It doesn't matter if you're in the US or if you're in London or in South Africa. And we need to understand it. We need to understand it. And this is one of the reasons that we really need to work together and unite. And, 2 years ago, ADL created the J7, which is the task force of the 7 biggest Jewish communities outside of Israel. And we meet on regular basis with the leaders of these communities exactly for that reason, to fight anti-Semitism together. Because not just because we're all experiencing very similar trends, but because we're stronger together. And we really need to learn from each other and to see what works and what doesn't. And we need to think of our children. As we said before, you said you have a 13-year-old, mine is 12. And he's Israeli. And for me to tell him not to speak Hebrew and to change to English or to Spanish in our case, it's horrible. It's really horrible. Well, and I'll just share one more anecdote. When I was an ambassador in Chile, and I heard that the community there gave an instruction to the kids, the students of the Jewish school, not to wear the symbol of school outside of school for security reason, I was shocked. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you have to teach them to be proud Jews and proud Zionists. And, we are not the old-fashioned diaspora Jew that keeps our head down and just wait for the wave of hate to pass. And now I realize how wrong I was and how much the experience of Jews in the diaspora is different from Israeli Jews. Israeli Jews, we take our Judaism we take it for granted. We take our safety in a way for granted. I mean, Israel is under attack for many, many years, of course, terrorism in Iran, etc. But you can live here as a proud Jew, and
Right.
you're never going to take your yarmulke or your Star of David off, right? And it's a different experience for Jews that live outside of Israel, especially now post-October 7th.
No, 100%. So I want to understand, because you in the study, and based on the results of the study, you have made some recommendations of what needs to change. Walk us through what some of those key recommendations are, what you would like to see happening on college campuses. You have some recommendations for them. You want them to see adopt IRA, the definition of anti-Semitism, and just some other programs specifically. What would you like to see happening? What's practical? What's realistic?
Yeah, so we put down some basic recommendations that really it's relatively easy to implement, that we believe that can help university administrations around the world to deal with anti-Semitism and protect their Jewish students. And of course, we take into consideration that each country is different, each university is different, and they need to adapt it to their own situations. But basically, we think that first adapting the definition, the anti-Semitism definition of IRA is important just as a starting point, right? Like you need to define what anti-Semitism is in order to fight it. Then we recommend that they'll have a special coordinator that will coordinate the work in fighting anti-Semitism and in making sure students, Jewish
on
students,
the college campuses.
at
Right.
the college campuses. Because if you don't have one person in charge, then we know how bureaucracy works.
I would say almost like
other.
maybe it's a bad comparison, but almost like there's a point person for sexual harassment on camp, at
Right.
the workplace or on
Right.
campuses. So
Or for-
similar,
yeah,
a similar
exactly.
job is what you're saying, right?
Exactly. And also to take security measures to protect the Jewish students and the Jewish organizations on campus. But I also want to share that there's a responsibility here, not just on the part of the administrations. There's also a responsibility when it comes to students' unions, for example, because another data that we found in this survey is that many Jewish students suffer from anti-Semitism that comes from their peers, and not just from professors or staff. So yes, the administration has the responsibility to make sure campus is safe for all students, not just for Jewish students. But there's also a responsibility for other non-Jewish students to take steps to make sure that the peers feel that they're part of this campus and that they can be who they are.
Yeah, I want to read just very quickly a testimonial from one of the students. She's just identified as Victoria B. from a university in Vienna in Austria.
Yeah.
And she says the following: there was an Intifada camp glorifying Hamas on campus. Our building already had anti-Semitic graffiti on it. One day I was terrified to attend a seminar. There were only 10 of us in the lecture hall. There were rumors that camp participants would roam campus looking for Zionists. We canceled the seminar, fled through the back exit. For a moment, I felt like I was in the 1930s and Jewish students were being chased from their universities. I mean, that sounds horrifying, right? Have you heard back from universities, colleges? Is there outreach that's being done actively by ADL, by the Jewish communities? Let's say, take, for example, in Vienna, there is a strong, relatively foundation of Jewish institutions. There are people doing now some outreach on with these study results?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole idea of these studies is not just to share information and data, but to use it for advocacy reasons and to make an impact and a change on campuses. So we're working together with WUJS because they are the ones on the ground. They are the ones who have students in every university, and they know what can work in each university and with whom they can work with. And of course, we work together always with the representative of the local Jewish communities in each country. Because again, they are the ones there. They know all the political actors, civil society, and they are the best partner that can tell us what can be helpful in their country and in each city. So I'm really hoping that this survey will be a starting point for a continuous dialogue with administrations of universities, for them to know that also that we are watching, not just we ADL, but the global Jewish community, and that we're all concerned about what is happening on campuses worldwide.
So I want to ask you, I mean, you finished up a long career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel back in 2023 and joined ADL. You had been the ambassador to Chile. You had served in other different posts in the Israeli Foreign Service. I want to speak specifically about South America, but I do want to ask you another question for a moment. As somebody who really knows intimately kind of the way Israel views foreign policy and how it formulates it.
Yeah.
And granted, you never sat in the cabinet and you were not an elected official. Do you think, I mean, I've long been struggling with this question of whether, you know, Israel knows, okay, we're going to go to war in Gaza. We're going to attack. We're going to now launch this offensive that's been looming for a while in Gaza City. And you can basically assume that there's going to be massive protests on college campuses, let's say, or other places around the world. And it's going to have a detrimental impact on Jewish communities, right? They're going to have to increase security. They're going to have to, this study is an example of we could have known back in 2023, this might happen.
Right.
Do you think that when Israel makes these decisions and the Israeli government officials, so the elected officials, not that it should be, okay, I'm not going to do X because there will be a protest at Columbia University, but should it be something that's on the table as a consideration, as something that the prime minister, the defense minister, the foreign minister should be analyzing the situation with that as another data point? And do you think it's already a data point for them? I'm not sure it is. I'm curious what you think. And do you think it should be?
So let me start by saying it should be. I've been advocating, even from my time as a diplomat, that Israel, regardless of which government is governing, needs to take the Jewish diaspora into consideration. It shouldn't be maybe the first consideration in taking a military decision regarding Gaza, especially in times of war. And of course, right, it's completely understandable that Israel, first of all, needs to take care of its security and think about the geopolitical picture and its own interest. But as I said before, we're all part of the same whole. And diaspora Jews cannot ignore Israel, and Israel cannot ignore diaspora Jews. Now, I know for a fact that post-October 7th, there has been much more interest in the Israeli society and also government and in the Knesset regarding the situation of anti-Semitism worldwide. We get asked for data, and we're invited for meetings and discussions, etc. So I'm pretty sure that the decision makers, they're aware, they know the data, they understand how things are in Gaza or in Israel are influencing in a way, directly or indirectly, Jews around the world. I'm not sure this is part of their main considerations when they take a decision regarding next steps in Gaza.
No, and I totally agree. I don't know that it should be even in the top 5. I just think it should be one of the 10 or whatever it is. If we consider how will this impact the Abraham Accords and how will it test our ties with Egypt, we should also be thinking about Jews around the world. And we might make decisions as a government that they're not going to like, but it should be something that at least is a consideration. Okay, I want to use having you here, like I said, to also ask you about your last diplomatic role. In 2019, you were appointed the Israeli ambassador to Chile, first female in the position. So that itself was, from what I've read, something of news at the time. But Chile is known as having the largest Palestinian community outside of the Middle East. Someone has once upon a time, a friend who was from there told me that in Chile, the Palestinians are like what the Jews are in other countries, like also something of a successful diaspora. So I'm curious, and I've seen and just been reading, so I really don't know much about this, and you can enlighten us. Chile has been downgrading relations with Israel since October 7th. I read that recently they recalled their military attaché, so like basically severing defense ties. There's been also a rise there of anti-Semitism. There was a mayor from one of the cities that recently visited Israel a few months ago, kind of broke with the trend that's been very anti-Israel. But fill us in what's going on there. I mean, how bad is the situation?
So first, I'll start by saying that Chile is a wonderful country. I loved serving there. It's beautiful. The people of Chile are great people. And yes, there is a big Palestinian community. And as you mentioned, they're the biggest one outside of the Middle East. I'll mention that, ironically, in a way, most of them, if not all of them, are Christian. Most of them have escaped from the Turks in the times of the Ottoman Empire, and the minority left in the wars with Israel. And for some reason, in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, the leadership of the Palestinian community in Chile has become radicalized more and more. To a point that a few years ago, when I was ambassador there, the president of the Palestinian community has openly stated in a radio interview that he supports Hamas. Okay? So this is as extreme as it gets. And they are very influential in the society, in politics. They have many politicians in the parliament and in the different governments, and quite wealthy as well. And unfortunately, that created a situation in the past decade where there is more and more anti-Semitism and intimidation against a very small Jewish community. There are about 15 to 18,000 Jews in Chile, and nothing more than that. Now, it was more or less bearable when there was a government that actually took care of the security of the Jewish community and make sure that nobody crosses any really red lines, right? So I had the honor to serve there under the Piñera administration, and he was the only Chilean president that visited Israel twice, for example. He also had Palestinian in his government, and he had a Jewish minister in his first government, and he really tried to balance things off. And then the current government got elected with President Boric, radical left. He was already an anti-Zionist as a parliamentarian and crossed some lines to very blunt anti-Semitism as well. And it was quite obvious from the moment that he was elected that it's not going to be any good to the bilateral relationship with Israel. And what happened was that not only that it hurt the bilateral relations, but it hurt the relations with the Jewish community. And until today, President Boric refuses to meet one-on-one with the leaders of the Jewish community.
Wow.
This is while he constantly meets with the Palestinian community. So this is something that worries me as SVP at ADL, where a president is not taking any steps whatsoever to protect his own citizens, in this case, the Jewish minority of Chile. And not only that, but in his anti-Zionist ideology is also taking steps and making statements that basically, if he wants it or not, are supporting trends of anti-Semitism in his own country. So luckily, the number of anti-Semitic incidents in Chile is not as high as Western Europe or North America, but the Jews there feel unsafe because they are not protected by their own government, which in a way is similar to what we're seeing also in Colombia. with President Petro, who's very anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. Like he tweets on a regular basis against Zionists and Jews, etc. While the Colombian people love Israel, they love, of course, their Jewish citizens, etc. So we see this gap between.
I mean, I think it's also a lot in other countries in South America as well, right? We're seeing. I mean, Brazil is another example where the government has turned to the sharp left.
We didn't even talk about Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, right? That's like even a different story.
You serve there as a diplomat on behalf of the government of Israel. Is it more investment? Is it more, we need more staff, we need more people, we need more resources? What we need more Spanish speaking or Portuguese speaking Israelis? What is it that we need?
So first look, and it's not just Latin America. I think that the state of Israel for many, many years has not been paying enough attention to the war of information and neglected it. They didn't put budget. They took responsibilities from one ministry to another. There were multiple ministries dealing with Hasbara and public diplomacy, etc. While the adversaries were planning ahead strategically, putting budgets, putting man-hour, etc. So on that front, it's really time to upgrade our game, not just in Israel, but Jewish communities worldwide, and to work more in coordination and together. And also, look, I mean, in the case of Latin America, really, we can see the trend that these governments that we were mentioning, they're all far left, right? It's not like the US, Europe, other countries where you see anti-Semitism coming from the right, the left, the center, Islamists, secular, etc. There, when it comes to the government at least, so usually the problematic ones are the more radical left. So in my opinion, and this is something that I try to do as ambassador, we really need to put more effort actually in reaching out to the more problematic sectors in society and not to stay away from them and to deny dialogue. The first thing I did when the Chilean president Boric was elected and I had the chance to talk to him for like 2 minutes, like any other ambassador, was to tell him, Mr. President, you advocate for dialogue, and I'm inviting you to have a dialogue so we can openly talk about your opinions about Israel, and I can share my opinions and the information that I have. Unfortunately, he denied.
He didn't take you up on the offer.
He didn't take me up on that. But there's still time, and at least we need to be open for dialogue, even with people that we dislike and that we think that dislike us.
No, 100%. It sounds like there's also a direct correlation between what government is in position there, and I think we probably see that all places. You have a strong government, you have a government that cracks down, a government that engages with the Jewish community. It's going to be different. Ambassador Marina Rosenberg, the Senior Vice President for International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League, thank you so much for joining me.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thanks for joining me on today's episode. You can find us, as always, where podcasts can be found, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and the website of Times of Israel. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast. And in the meantime, if we don't speak before, have a Shana Tova, a great new year, and looking forward to staying with you in the upcoming Jewish year. Be well.